listening to Out Late with David. True stories of coming out later in life. And now here's your host, David Cotton.
When one partner in a marriage is straight and the other is not, it doesn't always end in divorce. Some couples choose what's known as a mixed orientation marriage. My guest today is a psychotherapist who did exactly that. He started his marriage fully monogamous, but 15 years in, things fell apart. Today, we'll find out how a new idea turned his marriage into a love story. Joining us today from his home in Portland, Oregon, Wayne Scott. Well, hello, Wayne, and thank you for being here today at Out Late with David.
Thank you, David. Thanks for inviting me.
Glad to have you. You've got a new book that's coming out, and today we're going to talk about mixed orientation marriage. Many of our viewers, they struggle coming out later in life and trying to think what options they have in their life. Do I stay married? How do I stay married? And how that all works. But let's talk about you first before we do that and get into that. When you got married, very bluntly, did you know you were gay or bisexual, or did you discover that later?
Yeah, I came out at a very tricky time to come out. I came out in the mid to late 80s in the darkest period of the AIDS pandemic. And I knew at that time that I was bisexual. That's what I had told my mother when I came out to her when I was in my teens. But that word bisexual, it had a real pejorative stigma attached to it, right? People were suspicious of it. The sexual identity politics in that time, if you recall, very, very polarized. And bisexuals in particular were seen as the people who were going to bring the virus to the straight community. So it wasn't a label that you used with any pride or affirmation. And so I tended in the early days, before I met wife, I tended to describe myself as gay, even though behaviorally, I was seeing both men and women, and that I think is very sort of developmentally. That's like what you do, like at that age, like you're feeling around different possibilities, different types of relationships. When I first asked my spouse out on a date, her first reaction was, as she went to her girlfriends with, was like, "Why is this a gay guy asking me out on a date?"
Right.
So, and in consulting with a mutual friend, she found out, oh no, he actually is one of those guys who dates men and women. And she was a little bit intrigued by that too, because she was at the time, she was identified very strongly as a feminist, as a woman who was interested in men who did not fit the traditional mold in a lot of ways. So that in some ways it kind of made me more attractive to her, I would say.
So she rationalized that just because of the edge of who you were and in the time it was?
A little bit. One of the other interesting thing is, prior to dating my spouse, I had, I think, 2 or 3 boyfriends of, like 9 months to a year, short sort of undergraduate kind of relationships. But we never talked about monogamy. That was never on the table. But during that time period, to be non-monogamous was becoming increasingly risky endeavor. And I had in 1987, I had a very scary HIV scare where a previous boyfriend was diagnosed with AIDS. I had to go through the process of figuring out what my status was. In that era, the wait was really, really long. The tests were not super accurate, and it was just like nerve-wracking. And so at the end of that experience, I was really clear that I did not want to be fooling around as much as I had been up to that point. And that just so happened to coincide with when I met my spouse, and we had been dating for about a month. She said, given everything that's going on in the world, if we're going to be dating, I want us to be monogamous.
When she said, I want us to be monogamous.
I want us to be monogamous. And for me, in my frame of reference, that was news that was something people talked about. Like, I was like, right. What a concept of monogamy. Like, I really thought about that or heard about that. So, but I mean, I adored her. I was crazy about her. And it also felt very safe after what I had been through. It felt like what a good idea that she's come up with here. I would not have to worry about HIV, and we would be this little protected container.
And did you feel that you could stay on that path of monogamy in that marriage as you move forward?
Yeah, as a 28-year-old, I thought I could do anything. And over time, it just wasn't enough. Right. Over time, we changed. People do change over the course of a marriage. We got older. We had 3 kids. We went through a huge, long struggle with infertility, and all the different tests and treatments they have to do for that. And that takes a whole whammy on your sex life. And then I think about 14, 15 years in, I wasn't the same person I was at 28. And I really felt very deeply and desperately like I had lost some very important part of myself, that I'd forgotten who I was almost. Wow. Right. And the thing is, and this I know is going to be familiar to many of your listeners. I didn't have a way of talking about that with my spouse that wasn't me asking for divorce. Like, our language was so limited in terms of how you could talk about, I didn't know how to explain to her, I am devoted to you, I adore you and want to stay with you, and I cannot ignore this other part of myself. I did not know how to have that conversation. And so we didn't have a conversation. We had a crisis, right? And she found out that I was trying to connect with men through the internet. And not something I am not in any way proud of or recommending to anybody. It's a terrible thing to go behind one's spouse's back. She found out I am not great at hiding things. She found out, and that precipitated this crisis. She asked me to leave the house, which I did. Lived a couple blocks away in an apartment. But we had 3 children. So I was over every morning, and whenever the kids were in the house, I was in the house, because there were 3 of them and there were 2 of us. And while she was mad at me and I was confused about what we should be doing, we both knew that our 3 kids needed us and that one of us couldn't do it very easily alone.
So how far into the marriage was this then, when that ship began to drift?
14 years.
14.
Yeah.
So when you said you couldn't do it alone, one of you couldn't do it alone, what do you mean by that? What came out of that realization?
Even though she was really angry at me and I was really confused about what I wanted to do with the relationship, we kept coming back that we needed to take care of our children together. And I think also over time, we also still loved each other. We couldn't deny that we still loved each other, cared for each other. I still wanted to hear about her day. She wanted to hear about my day. We're very deeply involved with each other's families, in a very warm, connected way. And so it was very hard to sort of convince ourselves that divorce was the right option for us. And at a certain point, we were working with a couples counselor at about 9 months in of working with us, nominally working on getting divorced, but not really looking like we were very actively getting divorced. The couples counselor said, have the 2 of you ever thought about a non-monogamous arrangement? Would you ever consider that? And the earth rocked at that moment. It was as if the Cascadia earthquake suddenly struck. I mean, I did not think that that a couples counselor, a licensed professional, could say you could consider an open marriage. But this woman, Lene, this is all captured in the memoir. She said, you know what? Your marriage can be whatever you want it to be. And sure, an open marriage will be harder because there won't be the same social support, especially in 2007, right? Different from now. But with really good communication and perseverance and dedication, you guys can make this work. If you decided to make it work, you can make it work. You don't have to take the stories that we're told about what marriage is supposed to look like. You can make your own marriage.
So what did that look like once you had a chance to sit down and define that between the 2 of you?
I think there was a period of like this like in between period for a long period of time. It was an experiment. And, after Lene tossed that option out to us, we had a conversation about, well, maybe we could try this as an experiment, maybe try for 6 months to a year. And then, and if it doesn't work, if it's intolerable, then we just have the most amicable, generous divorce you can possibly have. We transition to whatever the next phase of our relationship is going to be. But we found that, with perseverance and time, and also we had support. We had a really good counselor supporting us, that we were able to figure out a way to have other relationships, but also protect our bond to each other.
Were you back in the same house together, under the same roof?
Eventually. Like, I think this actually looks like a lot how it looks in a lot of couples where they're separated, where like it starts with me in an apartment, 3 blocks away, and then eventually I'm over at the house all the time, and then eventually I start to rationalize, well, could I sleep in the guest room some night? Right. And then eventually we make the guest room into my room. We're separate rooms, So eventually we were living under the same roof, but just in separate bedrooms. And that seemed to be an adjustment that helps both of us.
As a life coach, I'm committed to help you discover the passions in your life and help you map a course to achieve the things you really want. Together, we will unwind those persistent self-doubts that are holding you back. You'll begin to see your passions more clearly and set achievable goals. Throughout your journey, I'll be there to challenge and encourage you in moving forward to discover your authentic self. For more information about my personal life coaching services, or to arrange a complimentary consultation, visit davidcottoncoaching.com.
You're listening to Out Late with David.
So when you have that conversation with the therapist and she throws out the idea of non-monogamy, which was really contrary to the baseline and understanding of why you got married and to move away from her father, it had to be that way. How did she react to that?
I mean, I think there was a period of deep uncertainty. There was a period where it felt like a real threatening thing to contemplate. I think she was reluctant. I think she was ambivalent. And, I think that is how that does characterize. She didn't just embrace it immediately, and neither did I. Because, it wasn't just her tolerating that I would be going out with guys. We were going to do it in an equitable way. She was going to go out with guys too. Right. And in fact, when we sort of mapped out, well, what would it look like us to do this, go down this path? One of the things we agreed is, well, because of the symbolism of it, she had to go first. She had to be the one to start dating first. Because she had already been betrayed. And so if I just kind of jump out there like, the hare in the race ahead of the tortoise, right? It would very much look like I was kind of exploiting an arrangement. It had to be her going first. She had to see what it felt like first.
How did you arrive at that conclusion that it had to be her first? Was that her idea, the therapist's idea?
That was very much, I think she and I collectively agreed that there was just no other way, because we were also conscious of the fact that all of our friends and family would know we would be doing this, that we had to be sensitive to what it would look like to them. And what it would feel like to us. She already was in the position where she felt betrayed. Understandably, she felt betrayed. Yeah. And so I think it was just really, it was respectful for me not to get too far out ahead of it. And again, I also would say I was as ambivalent as she was in the beginning. I didn't know 100% it was going to work. I just knew what we had wasn't working too.
How would your friends and family know? You said they would know. Were you telling them, or just through observation? Yeah. Or
both? I think a little bit of both. I mean, we don't, I think we would obviously, to get through something like this, you have to be able to talk to people. You have to be able to process what's coming up for you and all that kind of stuff. So we had to have people we were talking to about what it was like.
How did you embrace that one?
I would just say that that's hard because you break a lot of rules when you decide to be non-monogamous, and even your best friends may have uneasiness or uncertainty, partly because for many of our friends, they were never allowed to have the conversation either when they originally got married. It's not a conversation that people, when people decide to get married, it's not on the table whether you're going to be monogamous or not. It's not an open discussion. You're just going to be monogamous, right? There's no room for the discussion. But we were having the discussion, and I think the fact that we were having a discussion could potentially be threatening to a lot of our monogamous friends. But we had friends who were able to flex and be there for us.
Well, you said we're going to break a lot of rules. I guess I would recast that as you might be breaking a lot of other people's rules, but you were actually defining the new rules for your life as you move forward.
Absolutely.
To stay together. It was a new rule set.
Yep.
So what compromises did the two of you have to make as you develop these new rules to go forward?
What compromises? I think dating people outside of your marriage brings in a whole other level of threat and risk, right? That you have to figure out, how are we going to manage the sense of threat these other partners potentially pose to us? And so we tried a lot of different things to see what could we do to reduce how threatening it felt to when the night she went out or the night that I went out. One thing that helped if we were involved with someone over a period of time was for the partner to meet the boyfriend. That helped. So I would meet the guy she was going out with, get to know them, have it be so that they weren't this stranger, right? And then she would meet whatever guy that I was going out with. And it's awkward. I'm not saying it's easy, right? But at the end of the day, we were both choosing good people. Right? We weren't bringing anybody into our lives who was a bad person. And in fact, I would hear what she did when she went on her dates with the guy she was seeing, and I'd be a little jealous because I'd be like, that sounds really fun. I wish that I was going to that concert, or I wish I was going to that poetry reading. We did really pick good people in our initial foray. I remember her first boyfriend, very generous soul, and he would send back little gifts for me. So he had great taste in clothes, right? He had great taste in clothes, and so he would send back clothes that he was tired of. He didn't want any more. Why don't you take this to Wayne and see if Wayne might like this? And I'd see it, and I'd be like, "That's a nice jacket." So a very weird situation, but it did sort of it was hard to feel threatened by someone who's giving you a really nice jacket. You're like, he's a good guy.
I guess what's running through my mind too is if you're dating people who I'd assume their perspective, they're assuming that this is not a lifelong commitment, that Wayne, when he's dating me or when your wife is dating somebody.
Yeah.
So how did they react to this environment when they found out about it? Because they may start with, oh, I've got somebody forever. Well, they can't be forever because they're actually still going to be in union at home.
Absolutely. We were always clear that we had a primary relationship and that we were both basically only looking for people who were in the poly community. Or for me, I was involved in a group called Husbands Out to Their Wives. And I connected with another man who, same age, had kids, and was in a committed relationship with his wife, but with an agreement to be open. And so that was the safest arrangement to possibly go into because we were both clear to each other. I'm never living with my wife. We're both very, very attached to our spouses. We can have this special friendship with each other, and they can know about it. But it's never going to become something where we are going to be moving in together or making a primary commitment to each other.
So when you both were dating, did you ever come together and do anything together as a group of four?
It's interesting that you ask. We actually did. One of the experiments. At a certain point, I had been seeing a guy, another Hal brother, another guy I met their husbands out to their wives. I'd been seeing him very seriously. I wanted Eva, my wife, that's the pseudonym in the book. I wanted her to meet him. She was like, "Oh God, really? Are you sure? It's really been long enough. I don't want to," because it's nerve wracking. It's nerve wracking to meet your husband's boyfriend. But the thing is, the guy that she was seeing at the time, whose name was Eric, he said, "Yeah, it's going to be hard for you to meet Tim, the guy that you're seeing. For her to meet Tim. How about if I come along? How about I come along as your support?" And so we ended up having the four of us, me, my boyfriend, her wife, and her boyfriend. And then who gets the check in that arrangement, do you think? Who gets the check? I mean, that's a really complicated. There's all these etiquettes that have not been figured out yet, right? So, I don't remember who paid. I just remember dreading when the check came because I was like, I really don't know who's paying for this because.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
I can't imagine being there, quite frankly. But what jumps in my head, though, are the kids. The kids are at home, I assume, and mom and dad are both dating. How do the children react to this arrangement that they're now observing?
Our children knew about it. Our children knew about my sexual orientation. I wish they cared more than they did. They just didn't seem to care. Their basic needs and what they wanted from us was very separate, and they got those things. And so they just didn't seem particularly interested in it.
What were their ages at the time?
They were school aged. So my youngest would have been, when we started, my youngest would have been 5 or 6. And my oldest would have been maybe 10. So
Okay. So you went through this experiment, and what is the status today? Are you still married?
So we've been married. We've been together for about 35 years, and we've been in this phase of our marriage, non-monogamous, for about 15.
Still together today?
Yeah, very, 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 very happily together.
So having been through this, what have you learned about marriage and relationships from having been in and in now today, this mixed orientation marriage?
I think one of the biggest messages that's come home really strongly for me is that, we live in a culture where there's a very strict marriage divorce binary, right? Where it's one or it's the other. And we have very narrow definitions of what a successful marriage looks like. And people get annoyed and feel dissonant when it doesn't look like that, right? And I think there's a lot of space in between those two ideas. There's a lot of different ways to be married, and there should be a lot of room to adapt the form to fit who you both are at different stages of your life. I mean, who we are when we're 28. Thank God I'm not the same person I was when I was 28. I mean, seriously, I was a very good young man, but what did I know about the world? We can't possibly be held accountable to the things we think we can do when we're 28. There has to be room. The structure of how we partner with each other has to be flexible enough to let us grow, and heal, and adapt. Our bodies age, our sexual desires change and morph over time. People discover that they are bisexual or homosexual, so there's got to be room for people to grow. I mean, one way I think about it is like my spouse and I have had multiple marriages over time, like strung together, almost like a strand of pearls. Every marriage is multiple marriages over time.
The same partner is what you're saying, though. It's
Yeah.
each of the life experiences.
Yeah, and you just recreate. It goes through iterations over time, depending on how you evolve and grow as people, and how you negotiate. Well, this is how we're going to work it so that we're still together. So there's the things we do to preserve our togetherness, and then there's the things we do to allow ourselves to grow as individuals, separate from each other. That also.
So what do you see?
Okay.
So what do you see as the next strand in the strand of pearls for you? The next pearl that you're going to add on as your marriage continues?
Yeah.
What change do you see there?
Good question. I mean, our children. It feels like they just left, even if they've gone a couple of years. It still feels like they've just left. They're all in their early 20s now, so we're very much in this sort of getting to know what it's like to live just the two of us in this big house that feels very empty. And looking for other ways that we fill our time other than taking children places or worrying about tuition. So I mean, we still spend a lot of time together. I see primarily see just one other guy at this point. And it seems very compatible. It's not taking anything away from anybody.
From my anecdotal experience, some men come out later in life and they end up in a mixed orientation marriage at some level because they don't want to come out publicly. They kind of drag their spouse in the closet with them. They stay either gay or bi, and they may have an agreement to, have a boyfriend and have some experiences outside of that. They don't want to upset, the family life, but they didn't go into it as consciously maybe as you did. So how could you give them some advice on how they might negotiate that type of an arrangement as they try to go through that, as a therapist yourself and having been a man that experienced it?
I think one of the biggest lessons for me was patience and giving yourself a wide berth of time to figure it out and to have to experiment with different ways of trying to make it work and create boundaries around it, and know that you will learn through making the mistakes, through the things that don't work, right? So giving yourselves time, giving yourselves grace, allowing room for each other for it to be rocky sometimes. It was not easy. And part of the reason I wrote the memoir is not a peaceful, easy story from, they were monogamous one day and they were non-monogamous. It wasn't a switch. It was a long, painful period of time of figuring out and reckoning. And I part of it, I wanted to honor for all couples who go through any kind of transition like this, that's okay. It's okay to take your time, to be patient with the messiness of the process. Lots of messy conflictual arrangements as you try to figure out what your way is. Because I do think that there's something that happens because, again, we've got this marriage divorce binary in our culture. A lot of people, when they see someone in a marriage that seems to be struggling, say, you know what, maybe you should leave him. Or maybe, he's not worth your time. Why don't you give up on him? This is not worth it. No woman would put up with this. And that's not helpful, actually. It's not helpful for people to tell you what to do. It's a big stakes decision, what you do with a marriage. And so it should take a couple years. Like, it's okay to take a couple years to figure out what creative form can this morph into to allow us both to be the people we're supposed to be.
Yeah, that patience is incredibly hard, I think, to follow. I know when I came out, it was like I had been bursting and it just had to come out.
Yep.
And maybe I might do things differently had I been more patient. But,
yeah. It's hard. It's hard, I think, especially, like I know when we had our crisis, right? My crisis, which became our crisis, I was very desperate and lonely, right? And when you're desperate and lonely, you do things you're not proud of. Because you just want something to help the loneliness go away. But yeah, I think patience, a lot of patience.
Or sometimes validation of the thoughts that I've been keeping in my head.
Yeah.
I want to share them to get validated that they're okay and it's me. I want that, acknowledgement of who I really am that I've been hiding all these years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not necessarily thinking of all the second order effects of that.
Yeah. One of the discoveries I made as I was writing this, it wasn't the book I thought it was going to be. I had done separate essays about different experiences we had on the path to non-monogamy, just kind of grappling it with myself, trying to make sense of things that had happened to us. Sometimes I thought they were funny little stories about a marriage gone awry. But then I realized at a certain point I had like 6 or 7 of these essays, and I lined them up chronologically, and I thought, you know what? If I just filled in a couple gaps, I could have a memoir here. And once I looked at all these episodes, all these stories together, I realized that even though there was a lot of storminess and messiness throughout, there was also an incredible amount of devotion. This couple that I was writing about, my spouse and myself, we could not have tried these hard things unless we had the grace of each other's love. Even though sometimes we thought we were angry at each other, it was undeniable that there is love threaded through all these different stories of things that we went through. And I realized that somehow, even if I was writing about a couple who think they're getting divorced, I had actually written a love story. It's just a very unlikely love story. It's a love story that's born out of this very hot crucible of reckoning.
So what motivated you to want to share all this thought and experience and put it in a book?
I think one of the things that helped me as I was coming to terms with my queer identity when I was younger, and when I was coming to terms with where we were going with our marriage, was that other people had written about their experiences. So the title, The Maps They Gave Us, comes from a beautiful series of love poems that the lesbian poet Adrienne Rich wrote to her lover when they were first getting together. And the line is, "Whatever we do together is pure invention. The maps they gave us were out of date by years." Right? And so these are my queer ancestors. These are the people lighting the path. Like there were people who went before me. I am not the first person. We are not the first people to be a mixed orientation arrangement, to try non-monogamy as a container that might fit for us. Other people have done it, and they are queer and feminist people, and we just need to read them, right? And they were, D.H. Lawrence, Oscar Wilde, E.M. Forster, James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, all these authors that I read, they're all in the memoir too. Like I'm always grappling with some queer author who's speaking to me, lighting the way for me. I had that gift, right? I had those authors give the gift of their vision to me. I wanted to be that to somebody else too. Like I felt like somebody else had sort of lit the path as far as I could go. I want to light the path even further for other people. Because again, I think there's still so much stigma attached to these kinds of arrangements that it's much easier to just not talk about it.
Yeah. Well, as you said, you're breaking someone else's rule as you define your new rules.
Yeah,
So the book is clear.
Rules. The church's rules. Like most people are really scared of the church. They're scared of their preachers, right?
So, yes. Well, the book is called The Maps They Gave Us, and I'm sure it's available wherever people buy their books. Wayne Scott, thank you so much for sharing your story today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. This is a great conversation.
It goes without saying that Wayne and his wife have a unique relationship. They chose to break the rules and norms of society and boldly define the boundaries for the relationship they desired. For them, they have truly redefined what marriage is and shown us that perhaps it can be whatever you want it to be. It's an arrangement that requires honesty, trust, and communication. Wayne and his wife have proven it can work if both are committed. Thank you again to Wayne Scott. His book is called The Maps They Gave Us. Thanks for listening, and join us next time on Out Late with David.
To hear more episodes, visit outlatewithdavid.com. And to learn more about personal life coaching services, go to davidcottoncoaching.com.